Hi everyone. In our last movie, we talked about how to add a new gauge. This brought into play the new gauge editor. Probably more likely in your operation is not adding new gauges, but you may want to change your existing gauges. So let's take a look at this and let's find out how we do that. Now you've seen in earlier views that we can come in, tap the gear icon, and edit gauges. This allows you to size and place your gauges as you see fit, but not much else. So you can move various gauges around, place them where you want them, and either save that edit. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and cancel, which brings us back to the default. But let's go ahead and take a look at this, and let's start with, let's say I want to change the operation of the road speed gauge there at the very top. So I'm going to tap on the gear icon, tap on Edit Gauges, and now I'm going to tap and hold for 2 seconds on the gauge that I'm interested in this case the road speed gauge. Hold it there, and it brings up that gauge in the gauge editor. Now, just like we did before, we can adjust things like the title and the PID number, but that really doesn't make much sense. What we're more likely to change is the ranges in the gauge, the maximum values, so that we can get a gauge that more precisely fits what we want to do. So let's say, for example, I really don't need the speedometer to go all the way up to 90 because I don't ever drive over 62.5. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the max down to 75. Now, I'm going to go in here and change, because it proportionally kind of changed the major and minor tick intervals, I'm going to change the major tick interval up to 15. There we go. And I'm going to add a minor tick interval of every 3. And so that gives me a gauge that looks the way I want to do it. It looks pretty good. But let's say I also want to have 1 unit of precision. So I'm going to move this here. So now my road speed shows me 1 decimal point precision. Now I can go ahead and update that, and you'll see it's now replaced the gauge that was up on the screen, and I tap on the gear icon, save edit, and that becomes part of my default gauges now. If I get out of the application and restart, it will stay as we wanted to do it. Now let me go back and edit that again, because I want to make another change. So I'm going to click on Edit Gauges, tap and hold for 2 seconds on the road speed gauge, and this time I'm going to talk about the Enable Warning Alarm. So this is a way that we can actually set an audible and a visual alarm. Now unfortunately, when I'm recording here, I can't hear the actual visual alarm, so you'll have to believe me, but it does work. So I'm going to go in, and let's say I don't want to travel over 40 miles an hour. So I'm going to change my warning zone maybe to 30. Now let's go down just for fun. I'll take it down to 15. But I'm going to set my warning zone to like 35, let's say. So now my critical zone starts at 35. My warning zone goes up to 35 from 15. Now if you'll notice, the gauge is in red as it sits now. I'm going to go ahead and enable warning alarm by tapping on that, and you'll notice the alarm has gone red here. That's because it's actually alarming. If we were operating in your RV, then it would also be making a buzzing sound. Let's go ahead and change the critical value up just a little bit, since that's quite a bit higher than we're doing. Let's put it at 60 and see what happens when it goes below 60. When it gets below, it should stop alarming. So I'm going to go ahead and, while we're waiting, I'll update that gauge and save the edit. You can see we're at 60 and it's still alarming, but now that we've gotten down to 58, the alarm is off, and there would be no audible alarm as well. So this is a way of setting an alarm for you. Now let's say we're more interested in a negative type of alarm. So let's take a look at our oil pressure gauge. I'm going to tap on the gear edit gauges, and I'm going to tap and hold oil pressure. That brings up the gauge. Now if you notice in this one I have the warning value and critical value set all the way up at the max. What that does is takes off the zones so you don't see them. So I'm going to put a critical value down around, let's put it down here to around 10 for now. And let's bring this down to like about 40. And so this gives us an inverse gauge. And should our value drop below 10 pounds of oil pressure and we turn this on, we would get a visual and an audible alarm while the gauge is operating. Let's change it again just to show that it does work. And I'm going to put the critical value, I'm going to put the warning value way up here, but the critical value is going to be at 50. And so now you notice that I'm below 50 and I'm into that red zone again. I can bring that down to like 45 and that turns off the alarming. So I'm going to go ahead and update the gauge, save it to the current gauges, and if we watch it, when it gets above 50, it would act, and there it goes. Actually, I made it 45, so there, when it gets below 45, you'll see that we go into an alarm kind of state on that. So that's how you set the various alarm stages and turn on and off alarms. Now, one thing is, if you are in an alarm state, which none of my gauges are right at the second, you simply need to double tap on the screen on that gauge while it is alarming, and that will temporarily turn it off until the next time you restart the application. So let's go back and kind of force that to happen real quickly. Edit gauges. I'm going to go ahead and pick this gauge here, and I'm going to put the critical all the way up to about 50. Update, save. Now you'll notice that it's red, it's alarming, okay, because it's below 50. By double tapping, that clears the gauge, even though it's in the red zone, and you can see that in the oil pressure gauge there, the visual and audible alarm is gone. I'm going to do the same thing right now on the road speed gauge. I tapped it, and even though it's in the red, it's not alarming. All right, I hope that helps.